Hello, I'm Tactical Pascal, welcome to the channel. I hope this finds you all safe and well. In this DCS World video, I'm going to cover how to use George as a combat taxi in your AH-64D. Now I say combat taxi, in combat he's pretty hopeless. What I will show you is how to use him in single player so you can get comfortable as the co-pilot gunner, so when you do find yourself in multiplayer, you're all over it like a seagull on chips. Let's get cracking. So here we are in the cockpit of the Apache once again, and I'll show you how you can use George as essentially a combat taxi. So I'm going to switch to the front seat. Now controls as before, if I press escape I'll go adjust controls. We need to have our, let's go for co-pilot gunner, we need to have a button selected for our George AI helper. Default is left control V, and then of course we need to have our George AI helper up, down, left and right, WD AS or WSAD on the keyboard. I've got that mapped to my HOTAS as a hat switch, so I can use that quite easily. So now I'm in the front seat. Let me get rid of my iHads initially, I'll bring it back on later. Now, if I want to bring up my George AI helper, I press the button. Now we can see here, the mode there in the bottom left is HB, that's hover, bop up. Now this is basically when we're sitting not doing anything, we're hovering, so we can adjust slightly left, slightly right, slightly up, slightly down for targeting. So what I'm going to do is tell George to go up to about 80 feet by tapping up on the George AI helper, and he'll start to increase altitude. Now as soon as I'm up and off the ground, I'm going to switch the mode by pressing left short, so tapping left, and I'm bringing it into flight mode. Now I'm going to tell him to move forward by tapping up 3 times to get to 90 knots. So I'm telling him just go forward 90 knots. Now a bit of symbology on this screen here. So the sort of home plate thing you can see there, that's towards waypoint 1. The triangle here on the inner bit of the compass, that is pointing where the nose is right now, and the little wedge in the outside is where I've told George to go. So he's flying towards where we want to go. Now there's a few ways we can tell him to go where we want to go, but let's say we want to clear these trees, so I'm going to press and hold up a little bit to go higher.
Copy. Increasing altitude.
That was close, George. Good job. I'm paying attention, isn't it? So to increase altitude, you press and hold up on the George AI helper.
Copy.
To decrease, you press and hold down on the AI helper. Now we've avoided a massive crash. We'll discuss how we can move. Now if I want George to go to the right or to the left, what I can simply do, let's say I want to go over here somewhere, as I press and hold left, and that rotates that outer wedge, let it go, and then he'll start to turn there. Or an easier way is bring up your iHads, and let's say I want George to fly over that direction, and just look where I want him to go, and I tap right short.
Copy. That's the location.
And that tells him to head to that location. Now he's staying at the same speed we've told him. If I want to change speed, like I said earlier, tap down or tap up. That adjusts you faster or slower. Now, I am in a training server, or rather it's the live fire mission, so I know there's targets somewhere over that direction. So I'm going to tell George to head there. And then what I'm going to do is turn off my iHads. And I'm going to switch to the CMOS page. Now, on the bottom right there, you can see safe and auto. If I tap up, it arms it. If I tap down, it puts it to bypass. If you're flying with George, I recommend you leave it as auto. Okay, back to flight. So we're flying in the rough direction we want to go. With our right height, we're not going to crash into any trees. So what I'm going to do now is go to my combat mode. Now, if I switch to my TADS, let me zoom in my big fat face. I say zoom in, I just moved my head. That's manual zoom. Now I'm looking out for targets down in this area. There is stuff out there, but I think we're a little too low right now to see it. So what I'm going to do is tell George to slow down a bit by going to the flight page. Slow down to 40 knots, and I'm going to tell him to go up to about 390 feet. Right, I had a phone call midway through the flight. So we're back in our flight mode. We're moving at 40 knots. and I've got George to go basically on the heading that I want to go. Now I'm going to look for some targets out and ahead of our aircraft. What we got? Anything out here? Basically want to find targets so we can tell George to hold his position. How are we looking? Nope, no one all the way there. Aha, right, now we have some targets. So we can see here we've got our airfield and there are some things sitting on it. Now what I want to do is tell George, in fact, what's the range on that? Let me get a quick laser out. If I make my weapons to arm, that is. Right, 7,400. That's close enough for me. So I'm going to tell George here to stop.
Copy, just slow one down.
And now I'm going to switch to combat mode. It says there pylon limit, that's because our nose is up in there. Now let's say I wanted to engage, I guess, one of these things over here. You can see their yaw limit. So what I'm going to do is tap up.
Roger,
And then George will align the helicopter's nose while I'm in combat mode to that target. So tapping up and he aligns the mode. Now, because we've stopped, I'm going to go hover bop up. I'm just going to adjust our height to 500.
Copy, increasing altitude.
And I'll go back to combat. Now this lets me look in towards my targets. Again, we get yaw limit as he maneuvers. There we go. Now he's realigning the nose. Now let me have a look. I will just target one of these BMPs, I guess. So we've got our big box, which means we're lined enough to fire it. And then we'll rifle off a hellfire. And George is just going to hold us steady here. We've given him his commands. We're sitting far enough away that they're not going to be a problem for us, and we've fired our hellfire at 7,246. I don't know if it's meters or feet. I still need to read that. Comment below if it's meters or feet. Must be feet. Now we just align up and destroy the target, I think. Or did that go along? Is there smoke coming up from it? Yeah, we got it. Nailed it. Thanks, George. Now, because we're in combat mode, in fact, we're in front of some power lines. I don't really want to descend down on top of them because George will crash into them, but we should be far enough behind. So we'll go back into hover bop up mode. Now we can see the targets, they can just see us, so we're in hover bop up. Let's get down behind the trees.
Roger, decreasing altitude.
So we'll tell George, go down to 300.
Roger, decreasing altitude.
And then he'll just slowly take us down, maintaining a hover. I was still pointing out towards the targets, but now we're beginning to mask against those trees there, because we're still very far away from where they are. Example, that range, what? Yes, 7,500. Not bad at all. Now we're staying above our power lines, which is good. So that's how we get George to essentially get us the target. Let's bring us back up to a decent height.
Copy,
And we'll
increasing
go
altitude.
to flight. And we'll tell him to go to 70 knots.
Copy, speeding up.
And I will was guns. Let's go 90 knots. We'll fly out towards the target.
Speeding up.
So I've got flight mode on. We've got our heading selected now. Obviously George yaws a little bit to the left, then he'll come right. That's just the way he flies. He trims himself out. So we will actually get onto that heading eventually. So he corrects a little bit and then he'll turn back onto our heading. There he goes. Now, I'm flying towards it. Let's say I wanted to fly towards those trucks. I'm going to go to combat mode and say align.
Roger, aligning.
And he's going to change his nose. We're still 5,000 away from those trucks, but we are heading towards them. So I'm going to stay in combat mode. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to flight mode. And when we get a little bit closer, we'll tell them to slow down. So ballistic limit's still too far away for these trucks. And it allows you to concentrate on your TDAC, on your TADs. Just get George to fly you around the place. It's a little combat taxi. It's good for your practice. If you want to practice being the CPG, it's good to know how to work George.
12 o'clock, searching.
So, as you can see, we're flying directly towards our target area.
SA6.
If I want them to align again, we're in flight. Switch to combat. Hit align.
Roger, aligning.
And then we'll go back to flight. Get them to slow down to 40 knots now. Back to combat. And then we can start firing at the trucks. See where those shots landed. Miles away, that's where. See where these shots land. That's me aiming just behind the trucks. We're still moving towards them. My manual range is set at 3,000. I did forget to change that at the start. There we go. Now we fly past the targets. Give them a bit of lead. Helps if you adjust your manual range, doesn't it, Pascale? There you go, out the window. Everything's on fire. Easy peasy. George, as your AI pilot, is quite good. I wouldn't recommend using it in a combat environment. I mean, obviously this is just training, but this will allow you to get a good lot of practice in when you're flying in single player. So again, if I want them to go away to where I want them to go, back towards base, for example, let's press and hold all the way around to 060.
Coming left.
Tell them to go max speed.
Speeding up.
I'll tell them to send down again to 200.
Roger.
210 is
Decreasing
close
altitude.
enough. And then down we go. That's how we use George. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. If you do want to come along and fly with real people, come along and join us at Tactical DCS. We do training, we do missions together. We've got our training Thursdays, Tactical Tuesdays, Windy Wednesdays, Warbird Wednesdays, all sorts of stuff going on. It's really great fun there. Now over 5,000 members, so you're more than welcome to come along and join us. Yeah, easy peasy. That is how we use George. Quite simple. Taxi! Till next time, Tactical Pascale. Out.